You're listening to the Elvis Ultimate Fan Channel podcast, the channel that is devoted 100% to the life and career of the biggest selling recording artist of all time, with your host, Steve Francis.
Hello and welcome to Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel. Before we dive into this week's episode, I'd like to remind you to join me live every Wednesday and Sunday for my YouTube live stream shows when we have Elvis Fan Chats, an Elvis Fan of the Month quiz with monthly prizes up for grabs, and I pick my Elvis Song of the Week. In the first part of my interview with actor Nick Adams' daughter Allyson, she spoke about finding a manuscript he had written about his friendship with Elvis Presley that began in the summer of 1956. In this second episode, Allyson tells me about their continuing friendship during the 1960s, the truth about Elvis and Natalie Wood, and Elvis's reaction to her father's death at just 36 years old. So just to pick up where we were saying about Nick's movies, tell me about Twilight of Honor.
Well, Twilight of Honor was the movie with Richard Chamberlain and Joey Heatherton, and my father had a supporting role in it about a murderer on death row. And so my father, who was very much a public relations man, as far as an actor, he was great at PR. I mean, he would deliver a press release on horseback in his rebel uniform down Wilshire Boulevard just for publicity. And so he launched a whole campaign to get nominated for the Academy Award, which they didn't do as much back then as they do now. Now they really lobby. And the story goes that my father had this big, huge Academy Award party, and then he drank too much beforehand because he was too nervous and passed out in the bedroom with all the mink coats. And Roger Smith and Doug McClure, and they had to break in and get my dad in the shower. And
Yeah.
Anyway, my father and my mom were the first ones at the Academy Awards, and my father was there practicing running up and down the aisles to accept his Academy Award. My mother said she's never so embarrassed. And then he lost. And what happened was that when the movie came out, my dad did all this lobbying to get nominated, but when the movie came out, a lot of his part was cut. And so I think people in the industry or whatever felt a little duped. That's what Jay Bernstein told me. He said that was one of the reasons why my father had a hard time finding work after his Academy Award nomination. People were mad at him. And that's when he went to Japan and made the Godzilla movies. I just did a podcast interview a couple of weeks ago in Japan for the whole Godzilla universe. And, you know, that was considered the low point of my father's career when he was making these sci-fi B movies in Japan, but then they ended up becoming cult classics.
Yeah.
So
they I mean,
a huge following still.
Yeah, I mean, there's Frankenstein Conquers the World, Die Monster Die, Invasion of Astro Monster, and Mission Mars. But as you say, you know, they were at the time they were considered low budget B movies, but they have become cult classics. Yes.
And he'd be so surprised. I think he'd love that.
Yeah.
I think it's ironic, too. And I traveled, my family, we went with him when he shot one of the Japanese movies in 1965, and I have very vivid memories of Japan and being there. It was wonderful. Right before my father died and Elvis was getting ready for his comeback in 1968, they were in touch again and talking, and we're going to plan on jogging and getting in shape together. And I found this out from a close friend of Elvis's named Wanda, and she sent me quite a long, detailed email telling me about how upset Elvis was when he heard that my father had died, and that Elvis was slapping his leg and saying, "Those bastards killed him. Those bastards killed him." And Elvis really felt that there was some foul play with my father's death, because he said he and my father had discussed the medication that my father was taking, and that he knew formaldehyde. He knew that he could not take too much of it. And Elvis was very suspicious because of the amount that was found in my father's system, and that it would kill you instantly, but yet there was nothing in the medicine chest. There was no sign of it. He was sitting up. He had a tape recorder. So Elvis, which he knew the police in Bel Air, and he called his buddies to try and find out more about what happened to my dad. But like everybody that tried to investigate it, they were told, just leave it alone, leave it alone. So I still don't really know what happened. I have my suspicions.
Well, can I ask you, I did read somewhere that your father's death certificate was altered twice. Is that correct?
Well, yes, the death certificate was changed. First, they said it was overdose, suicide, and then undetermined. So they decided it was accidental. But what the media and sort of the myth is, everybody thinks that my dad killed himself, but I don't believe that he did kill himself, because it's one of the reasons why Elvis was so upset. It was like he said, no, Nick would never kill himself.
Elvis and Nick share, unfortunately, the fact that it was two young lives cut short. Your dad was, how old was your dad when he died?
He was 36.
36. So even younger than Elvis. Elvis was 42. Can you tell me about finding out about Elvis dying?
Well, I was, like I said, I really wasn't part of the Elvis world or a huge Elvis fan before I found the book. It was sort of like before my time. And I discovered Elvis basically when I found the manuscript, and then I just fell in love with him. And so it was much later that I kind of came to the Elvis world, obviously.
Do you remember hearing on the news or somebody telling you that Elvis Presley was dead?
I do, and I remember always thinking about Lisa Marie.
Yes.
I sort of felt this kinship with her. I mean, I've never met her or anything, but I know what it's like. We're about the same age. I know what it's like when you find out that night that your father has died. It's it just stays with you forever. And I've always thought about how hard that must have been for her.
Yes, because she was only what, 9, I think, at the time.
Yeah, and I was 8. So yeah, it's like the same age.
Yeah,
when we lost our fathers.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. It really has. Obviously, with me being a huge Elvis Presley fan, I've known about Nick Adams for all my life, just about. I remember reading about them being together during the 1956s and so forth. I've seen loads of pictures of your father with Elvis and Natalie Wood. It just strikes me that it was almost like a summer of love, that summer of 1956, where the three of them were just palling around and just having a great time.
Mm-hmm. And people thought that Elvis and Natalie were dating. They weren't. And, Natalie did come to Memphis, but she didn't stay long. She thought Elvis wasn't exciting enough for her to be a boyfriend, Natalie was a wild child. And,
yes.
And Elvis, I mean, he liked to have a good time, but he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't cuss. He, I mean, he liked to sing songs. I mean, my dad said he would play Mahalia Jackson, You Never Walk Alone, over and over. He would find a singer that he loved, and he would play it over and over and listen how they sang it, how they did it. I mean, he was obsessed with music. I mean, that was his life.
Yeah. It would strike me that maybe Natalie was more Hollywood and Elvis was more Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Definitely.
Your father has gone down in the book as saying he absolutely loved Memphis and he loved the people of Memphis. And he also said that no matter where him and Elvis went, they always heard people saying, gee, he's such a nice guy. Can you believe how nice he is?
That's true. That's true. And it was when my father went to Memphis and Tupelo in 1956 that he really fell in love with the South. He had never been there before. And I think that was part of what, when Andy Fenedy came up with the idea for the Rebel, which takes place after the Civil War, and my father plays a disillusioned Confederate soldier, probably with PTSD, and wandering the West and trying to understand and help people. And but he loved the South, and he loved the history, and that's why he named my brother and I, gave us our names. Allison Lee Adams and Jeb Stuart Adams were named after Confederate soldiers.
Oh, I see.
Or generals.
I see.
But which is probably not, it's not very popular to say now, but it was a different time back then.
Yes.
Than it is now.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we round it up, mentioning the book and so forth, and where we can get the book?
Oh, I'm just so glad there's still people interested in the story. I'm happy that it's out there and people can learn more about the Elvis. That a lot of people's books nowadays are sort of about the later years and more juicy, salacious kind of stuff. And this book is really about a feel-good. It's a feel-good book about Elvis. It doesn't have any shocking details.
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of before the curtain finally came down and the myth and all the sort of hype and exaggerations and people just trying to pull him to pieces in the last few years of his life. But this is, like you said earlier on, it's like just the end of innocence. That's what it is. That last sort of 1956 summer before it got just nearly unbelievably. His fame was just it just almost consumed him after about 1957, I think. Anyway.
It did, and then he went into the Army, and then the death of his mother. I don't think he ever got over that. I just don't. And my father flew to Memphis the minute that Gladys passed away to be with Elvis, and I'm trying to remember. I think it was Red West, that told me that my dad just like slept on the floor next to Elvis just so he wouldn't be alone. I mean, that's how good of friends they were. Yeah. And one thing I do want to add is that my father got a lot of flack for being close with Elvis, and as well as being friends with James Dean, but they really were true friends. And but they got a lot of flack. And I think the Colonel didn't want Nick and Elvis in public together anymore. And so my father would sneak. He would still fly to Memphis. He'd tell the press he was going to New York for an audition or something. And then he'd fly to Memphis and hang out with Elvis. So their friendship did continue. But but sometimes they had to just sort of do it under the radar.
Yeah. I think, you see, a lot of people just couldn't believe that they were just, friends and having a great time. People always try and think there was an ulterior motive for Nick befriending Elvis or Elvis befriending Nick. But they were just pals. They were just great friends.
Well, they were great friends, and all the rumors and all that stuff. It's like, are you kidding? My dad and Elvis, they were horn dogs. They liked women.
Yeah.
They had a good time. Yeah.
I mean, I know what you're trying to say in a roundabout way. I mean, there's mean-spirited people who would try to say that there was a relationship going on between Elvis and your father. You see, that's just another thing that people just try and twist and invent, and a lot of it just comes from jealousy.
I think so. I mean, that's the first beginning of the book, when my dad is defending Elvis, and he said it's just the green-eyed monster of jealousy.
Yes.
But it's too bad, because he really did pay a price. And the other thing is that, Elvis, my dad, I mean, they wanted to be famous. They wanted to be stars. Whether they used each other as far as, my father wanted to get a leg up, but at the same time, he was very respectful of when people were interviewing him, when he was with Elvis, and they'd ask him about him, and he'd say, look, I'm here to support Elvis. This isn't about me. So I think that he was very respectful of his friendships.
Okay, so the book, The Rebel and the King, forward by Allyson Adams, is available, as far as I know. It's still in print, and it's available on Amazon.
Yes. Mm-hmm. There's an expanded edition now, too. I did a second edition, and it's called the Expanded Edition, More Elvis, and it has about 32 more pictures than the original book, and it also has a essay by Roy Turner, who is the Elvis premier historian, as well as Marilyn Monroe, and he writes a lovely essay in the beginning, as well as a story by Elaine Dundee, who writes a story about how Elvis was sort of like the ugly duckling. I love that story.
Yeah. That's the one that I saw on Amazon when I was just researching for this interview. So it's the expanded version you really want to get, because that's the best.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
As I said earlier, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. I've enjoyed very much speaking to you, and thank you very, very much for joining me on the show and sharing this with the listeners.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm happy. I hope I can shed some new stories on Elvis, because there's a lot out there, but I hope I gave you some new things to know about him and his life.
And I would highly recommend the book, because I was reading it and I got a great kick out of it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks. I self-published it. I know there's a few mistakes. It's not perfect, but I just wanted to get it out there for the fans.
Well, you'll find that every masterpiece has a tiny bit of mistake in it. They always say that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
the thing that also in the Rebel, the first edition has, though, the original manuscript in it. I printed, Xeroxed the whole manuscript. The book that the expanded version is a bit edited, and The Rebel and the King, the first edition, if you're interested in reading that, you can find it on Amazon, and you can buy it through other sellers.
Right. That's great. Thanks very much, Allyson. Thank you very, very much.
And thank you, Steve, so much for reaching out and asking me to do this. So I hope we can keep in touch.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very, very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks once again to Allyson for sharing her stories of Elvis and Nick's friendship with us. I really enjoyed speaking with her, and I hope you, the listeners, enjoyed it also. The book The Rebel and the King by Nick Adams, with a foreword by Allyson, is available on Amazon, and I have provided a link in the description box below. Don't forget to join me live on YouTube every Wednesday and Sunday for Elvis Fan Chat. the Elvis Fan of the Month quiz with a monthly prize to be won for the most correct answers, and find out what song I have chosen as Elvis's Song of the Week. Until then, stay safe, and I hope you'll join me next time for another episode from Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel.